Hi, everyone. I'm Nate Shear, and this is Mind Force, the podcast where we explore love, life, and learning because your mind shapes everything. Today, we have a lot of topics. Today, we'll be talking about helping others discover their identity and purpose and watching them transform their lives through intentionality and vision, the broken system of healthcare in America and the need for new incentive structures, and giving of time, talent, treasures to nations around the world in the deepest areas of poverty. So let's start with the background. Let's start with a quick introduction. Mike, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what brings you here today?
Yeah, well, first off, Nate, thanks for having me on the show. This is a real treat. Normally, I'm on the other side of the camera here, so this is fun. Yeah, so Mike McClain, former Lieutenant Colonel, Medical Service Corps officer in the Air Force, did 14 and a half years after I graduated from the Air Force Academy, where I played basketball. Spent my last year there as team captain. Traveled all over the world, deployed downrange in support of the drawdown with ISIS. Did some forward deployed telehealth options there. I spent 2 years at Defense Health Headquarters, the medical annex of the Pentagon, for those that are unfamiliar. Worked with our top general officer, Susan Pietrzakowski, probably the greatest natural leader I've ever known in my life. Moved over to the financial side and helped run the Air Force budget, and then did the emergency COVID-19. Finished out with my third master's degree and just felt like I was being called to do something greater in the healthcare space. I think we're going to get to what my passion and calling is, but I'll give a little bit of a teaser here. That is to redeem healthcare in America, and certainly some cool stuff happening with that in the last even month or two.
That's awesome. Yeah, you didn't want one or two masters? That wasn't.
Yeah, I got to outdo my wife, so her and I have an ongoing competition. So yeah, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention wife of 11 years, Chelsea. She's a mental health counselor, former Air Force officer as well, and we have 3 kids, 7, 4, and 2.
Nice. Yeah, I'm right there. Dang. I got 7, 10, and 11.
Nice.
And to set the scene, I find it interesting. I've now had people South Africa, Australia, Germany. I think the list is longer than that I can think of. But to set the scene, where are you calling from today?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because as of this morning, a little teaser for those that know my podcast, we are in a new location. So my wife and I just bought a new house here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. So I have a brand new podcast studio. Not super satisfied with Riverside's green screen elimination technology here, but we'll make do. So I am in the basement of our new house in a brand new podcast studio, which I'll do a little short video on that so people can see kind of what we're doing.
I'm loving the brick. It's really good. I love the green behind your ears. It's really bringing out your eyes.
Yeah. We're going to have to change that midway through the podcast. People are like, did he move? No, I did not.
That's wonderful. Riverside, work on your elimination. You need some help. Speaking of financial, I'm curious, Dan Lee?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
It's so funny how it's such a small world. So I was sitting in a staff meeting yesterday, and his name came up on the slide, and just random story that is completely off topic from the script. But I knew nothing about what a medical service corps officer was at all. I'm relatively healthy. I don't go to the clinic. I have no idea what this career field even is. I dive off boats in Guam, doing a lot of scuba diving, and would do like buddy checks on this guy and his 2 sons, and make sure everyone's squared away, and dive off the boat with this guy. He was really nice and cool, and I knew nothing about him. And then later on, I stumble across MSC, I apply, I get picked up and all these things, and later realize Dan Lee should have been my 06 to interview with, but he had left just a few months before my interview, and that's who he was. And so didn't know he was an MSC, didn't even know what that job was, but it's a small world, and you'll end up bumping into people again. But I guess he's coming out here like April, May. I hope I get a chance to see him again.
What year was that, Nate?
2015 to 17 is when I was there. I left in 17 when I got picked up.
Yeah, big fan of retired Colonel Lee. He was our pseudo chief of staff at SG-18. We didn't have a secretary, so he mentored me, helped me as I was the exec for General Pi, and he is a remarkable human being, very intelligent as well.
Yeah, it seems like the resources go farther. I need to switch it up. So far, my boss is Veter, McFarland, and then, Dan, not my supervisor, but these people that are resourcers that go the distance. I guess readiness isn't where it's at.
That's an all-star cast right there.
Some good ones. Yeah, I've been lucky and very blessed. But we'll start with the warm-up. Mike, what's a defining moment in your life that shaped your passion for these 3 pillars that we talked about?
Yeah, I mean, my year with General Pi did a lot of shaping. in many, many, many ways. I had done shadowing at the executive level before with the Army Baylor program my year Providence Health and Services with Preston Simmons, the CEO of the Northwest region of Providence Health and Services. This was different. It was really a true mentorship. General Pye brought me under her wing, really showed me the ins and outs of what it means to, no kidding, run the size and scope of what she was dealing with. And, let's just take a pause here real quick. We weren't talking the normal SG-18 stuff. We were talking about medical reform, 4684, which is kind of a pseudo curse word here, which I'm not allowed to curse, and I wouldn't anyways. But nonetheless, 4684. And a bunch of things that were going on the heels of NDAA 2017. And so to really watch her kind of navigate that stuff in very intimate ways was really, really special. And so I learned a lot of things from that. I learned, I wanted to be a high-level healthcare executive, but not necessarily in the MHS. That was a huge turning point. I learned work-life balance. I learned how to have fun while working extremely hard. And she is a master at creating culture, and her culture is fun. But we also did a lot of work and worked long hours. And so her ability to kind of craft that, to build a team, it shaped me, it propelled me, it basically pointed me in a new direction in my career and what I wanted to do in life.
So that term work-life balance has always kind of drove me nuts. If you could change those words, what would you change them to?
And likewise, Nate, by the way, what would I change it to? Oh boy. Okay, here we go. I'm going to give you 2 words here. This is just right off the dome. Okay, the first word is going to be perspective. The second word is going to be identity. Because work-life balance often is boiled down to time allocation. And I feel like a lot of leaders force time allocation because they're like, got to do work-life balance. That's not what we're talking about. It's an overflow of the heart, not some archaic discipline that you force on and kind of overlay onto what exists inside of you. So I think when you have perspective, when you have identity, everything flows from that. And that's a really broad topic that I'd love to dive into sometime. But when you have that, work-life balance kind of flows naturally.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me, like the association of time with effort. Like there's no connection with that. I've had coworkers that, came in early and left late. And part of me thinks they didn't have a great family life, but I don't know that for sure. But they'd walk around most of the day with a coffee cup, and the bosses and whatnot be like, oh, they're doing so great. They've been here for 10 hours. And then I'd see another coworker I had where they would get there exactly at 7:30 and leave. They'd be almost by the door by 4:30 to watch the music because their driving factor was their daughter. So she had a driving factor, a why, her purpose. And hey, I'm going to get home, soak up as much time as I can with my child and recharge and come back the next day. But her tasks, like if you saw her checklist of things that got done, crushing it because I'm going to get out and be done by 4:30. And so the correlation, like the 8 hours versus the 10 hours, it's not even in any way comparable. Like she was destroying it and he was just hanging out with the coffee cup. But people would see the 10 hours and be so happy about it. Isn't that weird?
Nate, this is a hot topic, so to speak. It'll get me fired up because and I say I'm no longer a medical service corps officer. I'm long gone at this point, but there was this weird badge of honor with working long hours. And when I was working for General Pye, she tried to dispel that quite a bit. Everywhere we went, she would ask, what are normal working hours? And she would leave at 5:21 as a 21st Corps chief every single day. And would she log in late at night on a Monday night? Yeah, sure. Did the staff know that? No, they did not, because she didn't want to set a precedent of long hours. And, I think we have unfortunately laid in an incentive structure, formally and informally, by the way, that does not align with what we're trying to achieve. So we espouse work-life balance, which, again, another topic for another day. But then we applaud people who it's like, man, there's Dave over there with his coffee cup. Did he leave last night? There's a pillow in his office. I think he slept on his couch. Wow, what a hard worker. It's like, no, his family life is crumbling. He has nothing outside of here. So all he has is relationships at work, and his identity is wrapped up in completing the task and doing it well. If you give him negative feedback, there's going to be some problems here because that's all he has left. And, there's so much of a need to go through the soft stuff in the medical service corps like this. and really do kind of an analysis. And this goes hand in glove with the EI stuff and a whole other genre of conversation that we could get into another time. But I'll leave that there. Like I said, that's a hot topic for me, but an interesting one nonetheless.
Shoot, yeah, we better not get into DEI. We might be here way too long. So your first main pillar is
EI. I didn't say that's another 4684 and DEI are like the F-bomb. No, I said EI, emotional intelligence. Let's be real clear.
So for anyone not aware, the number Mike is referencing was a drawdown in the medical service, and it happened right before COVID. And so, obviously a very shock to the system where public health and other services were needed massively throughout the pandemic and things like that. So it made people kind of pause and wonder, like, was that the right direction or decision to draw down medical forces when we do play a vital role? But we needed that kind of example to show that. And unfortunately, it came to the pandemic. But we'll get into the three main pillars. That's classic. Your first one, helping others discover identity and purpose. And so, Mike, why do you think so many people struggle to find their true identity and purpose?
An hour episode with the three pillars that we're going to go through is just shortchanging these conversations. But I'm going to give the absolute highest level of my answer to that. I think it's twofold. I think, first of all, we in America, and then I would just say generally in kind of a global state, are very distracted and reactive. And I think both of those things put us in a state where we're not actually doing the hard work internally to look at ourselves and say, I need to prune that off. Here's something that I'm really wrestling with. Let me allow myself some time to kind of wrestle with that and work it out in my mind and my heart. And this goes, to a gratitude practice, which I think anybody out there that's like, man, I'm a pessimist, I'm really depressed, I'm struggling with stuff. Let me just offer up a gratitude practice. 4 to 5 things every single morning, write down that you're thankful for genuinely, and then just allow your mind and your heart to think about those things, to meditate on those things. Nate, I'm a Christian. So for me, this meditation is synonymous with my identity in Christ. But it doesn't have to be for those that are not a Christian. It's just one of those things that you're grateful for. And that moves into the identity question for sure, because once you understand what those things are at the most fundamental level, then you operate out of that identity. And that's what we're talking about with work-life balance. What is balance? What are you balancing towards if you have no idea at the core who you are, what you were designed for? The analogy I like to offer to people, and I'll pause after this. When you were a 6th grader, you had some bullies in the cafeteria. You had a group of friends. I'm not going to say on air what my group of friends were. Maybe if you bring me back for a part 2, I'll share that. But, before the world got a hold of you, before society said, Mike's 6'8", he's got to be good at basketball. Let's see what he can do. Before all of that, who were you? Like, what were your gifts? What were you passionate about? What were those things that drew you in naturally? And at some point, we lose the wonder of life. And life just starts to demand of us, to shape us, to push us. And I woke up one day 2.5 years ago and, successful career, Lieutenant Colonel in the Air Force, Medical Service Corps officer, all intents and purposes, I was doing great, but I was not happy. And I realized I had kind of been put in this position in my life that I didn't really want to be. I had excelled in certain areas. I got the accolades. They said, great job. And I was like, oh, certainly I'm doing well. But I never took the moment to pause and say, but am I happy with where I am? Am I where I'm called to be? And that's a much more profound question. And I think when people are seeking how to find contentment in life, man, is that not the most important question you could ask yourself, and then give yourself the time and space to really consider it?
So I'm curious. Well, I got 2 questions, but the first one is, with that gratitude and thankfulness, I'm curious, do you find yourself ever repeating the same ones or things like that? Does that have any loss where you're saying good health and family and friends? Does that kind of lose its luster after a while? Or what does does it come and go, or ups and downs? Or what does that gratitude, those 5 every day look like for you?
Yeah, definitely overlaps. And I have kind of a go-to. I'll share this one live on air. This is straight to the audience. I'm going to break the curtain there. No, my daughter's smile is something that, for whatever reason, hits me in such a deep level. And every time I think about it, I'm just overwhelmingly grateful for the opportunity to be a father, to love at a depth and in a way that I never thought was possible. And so that's kind of my cheat code, my shortcut. If I ever feel like, oh man, life's, rough right now, there's a lot going on, and I need just a quick fix of gratitude, I'll think about that. I'll think about my daughter kind of putting her hand on my cheek and giving me a hug, a kiss on the forehead or cheek. And yeah, that's my cheat code.
That's a good one. The other question I had was defining success. I find it just so interesting. So I had 3 different jobs in the Air Force. I was air traffic first, and I moved over to contracting. And I didn't have anything particularly against the jobs. They were fine, but I never felt the click, where you're really excited. You're ready to get in there. You're, excited to take care of the people and things like that. And it wasn't until I found the Medical Service Corps that the stars aligned and you feel that click. And that's 8 years in. And like I said, I had no idea what it was. So for someone that is out there and they, like you said, I'm doing okay and I'm, winning some stuff, I feel good. How do you help them define good and okay and actually finding that purpose? How do you know you've arrived, or do you know?
Well, saying you've arrived is really an interesting phrase, but I think allowing the space in solitude and silence. And that's something that we miss in society in profound ways, especially in America, especially as Air Force officers. We're inundated with information and demands and stresses and responsibility. And so for me, an irreplaceable practice is 20, 30 minutes where I'm not reading, I'm not looking at anything, I'm just silent. And again, as a Christian, for me, that's prayer, that's time with the Lord, which, by the way, for me, prayer is not just me talking, it's also listening. There's a great Mother Teresa quote that I won't go into here, but, well, I will. It's a great quote. Yeah. They asked her about her prayer life, and she said, well, I pray to God. And they said, well, what does God do when you pray? She goes, he listens. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand prayer. And that perplexed me for so long. But anyways, I'll leave that there for your listeners to chew on a little bit. No, I think having that time to meditate, to be free of the stresses of life is super, super important. And what I tell people all the time is accolades are great. Accolades are great. They make us feel good. There's something in our unique design that resonates with that. But what I'm talking about cuts way beyond external validation. It's an overflow of your heart. And there's only one way to get there, and that's to spend time with yourself. And if you're not spending time with yourself, then the answer is quite easy. You don't know who you are. And so you're just putting on a mask and a facade. There's a great book, and I'll have to share the title with you because I can't remember off the top of my head, but it talks about egos, which are basically masks that people put on. And over time, we add more and more masks because of the external validation that we receive. And it just feels good to be good at stuff. And I get that. I fell into the exact same trap. But at some point, when you realize who you are, what you were designed for, what fills you up, you're going to start to do things that by societal views make zero sense. I mean, I got a lot of flack, Nate, when I said, hey, I'm getting out. They're like, you just put on Lieutenant Colonel. You're crazy. 5 years until retirement. What are you doing? That's stupid. I'm like, I can understand why from your perspective that's stupid. But for me, it's a calling. It's something that I feel called to do. And so I'll leave that there. But did that kind of get at what you were asking?
Yeah, absolutely. And the next one is kind of to continue to expand on what you were talking about. I love actionable tips and tricks. So what tools or resources do you recommend for those seeking deeper self-recovery or discovery? Wow.
Discovery and recovery. Actually, both are appropriate. You have to discover and recover from a external validation mindset. And there's a people-pleasing element to that. I didn't even think about, I'm 6'8", so I was pushed into basketball, but even the accolades, I was conference, first team all-conference in high school, all-state, McDonald's All-American nominee. And so I was like, surely this is the direction I'm supposed to head. And you never really pause, and it's so easy to fall into that. And so I guess what I would say to listeners as just a starting point is, what are those things, those mechanisms that pulled you into almost a train of thought, a particular career path, whatever that is that you didn't make a conscious decision or really spend the time to think, is this who I am, what I want to do? And it's an easy answer for those that don't have any space to do that or take the time to meditate or be in silence. Guarantee you, there's something propelling you externally. And I'm not saying all external validation or input is bad. Certainly as a father, I love my children with all of my heart. I love my wife with all my heart. And so it's important to me that that connection is tight. And so certainly I'm always gauging the connection to make sure that I'm doing a good job as a father and as a husband. But the question really is, what's driving you? What is at the core of who you are? And so, again, it just really goes back to people creating the space to do the hard work. And I do say, I'll leave this here, Nate, but I do say the hard work because I think people almost mystify this time and say, oh, I'm going to give my 20 minutes, and then they get distracted with their phone or start thinking about all the stuff they have to do. The hard work is, there's an intentionality behind this, and that's really being present in that moment with yourself. And for those Christians, being present with the Lord. And that takes an intentionality, that takes an active role that's not just like, all right, I created the space, sweet, I was on my phone the whole time, sending emails. It's like, you didn't do it. You didn't do the hard work that was necessary to go to the levels you needed to go to.
Yeah, it really reminds me of when I kind of discovered that I wanted to be a medical corps or medical service corps officer, because I remember when I shadowed that day, I was like, this is the thing I have to do. But like at the deeper level, I didn't really understand. And it was kind of an epiphany in the middle of my interview, which is probably not the right time. You should probably have that epiphany before the interview. But it was interesting because I remember this like complete match. And so they asked like, why do you want to do it or something? And I had been to ALS. And so I talked about the 4 lenses and I'm like, I'm off the charts, blue and orange. Like I have none of the other 2 at the time.
My brother.
And I'm like, okay, so let me walk you through like how I'm the match. Like orange, I get bored, I get stagnant, I have to continue to learn something or I just get bored out of my mind. So I'm like, you change careers in essence, within one career field every couple years. Like I have wanted that for the longest time. And then I'm like, oh, I'm blue. And I'm like, you want to talk about, parties. Like I annoy my wife because I'm walking around and checking on everyone. Hey, is the temperature good? Can I grab you a drink? Like I'm annoying her on how much I'm checking on the party. And like to your point, like that's me at my core. Like that's me on the good day, that's me on Monday, that's me on Friday. Like it doesn't matter, that's me as who I am. And so I think when you find that thing, like you don't have to think, you don't have to put any extra effort or anything like that. It really just like clicks. Like that's who I'm bringing every day. I'm going to help people. I'm also going to pass out at blood and needles. So I'm glad I'm not on the front side of the house, but I will help and take care of anyone, anytime. And so I think that's really, kind of what you were saying. You just find that match where it's just the thing that it's supposed to be. And I think, like the silence, which I'm super glad you brought that up. I know a few different guests have brought that up, but I'm glad, we're bringing that up more and more because it just seems like we're supposed to go faster and do more. And now we have Google. You can get any answer in a matter of seconds. We want fast food. Everything's fast, but I think there's definitely something in that slowing down and the quiet that's super important. Anything else on that?
No, I think that's extremely well said. And when you're in that role or state, to your point, it's just easier. It doesn't feel like work. And I think part of the confusion, again, it goes back to external validation because officers are oftentimes alpha personalities. They want to perform, they want to do well, they're going to grit it out. This is not to say that you can't flex. Like I flexed, I would say the second half of my time at DHHQ on the financial side, I'm a blue orange as well. So my year with General Pie was great because she's also a blue orange. I would say in terms of the work demand, I had to flex the gold a little bit for sure, and a little bit of green to make sure the stuff getting to her made sense and was tight. But it's not to say that we can't flex. That's going to take extra energy to do that. And really what we're talking about is by nature, who are you? And so there's people that aren't willing to take the risk and say, 15 years, I'm going to hop out. That's okay. I would never ask somebody to do that. But I think it's a worthwhile exercise to consider what those things are that you naturally are. And just simply understand that when you're outside of that, there's a draw that's occurring. There's an energy draw that's occurring that'll have to be restored over time.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of two things. One, I remember taking it at ALS and they were like, well, you can shift based on, what kind of roles you're in and things like that. And I remember looking at my instructor, I'm like, you're crazy. I'm blue-orange. I'm always going to be blue-orange. And then I had to take it at SOS and all of a sudden they've all kind of evened out because now I have to have organization and that gold and the check boxes and moving through things. And I have to be somewhat logical with the green and things like that. So it is kind of funny because I thought that was baloney as a young senior airman. And obviously, you think you know everything at the senior airman level, but that's not the case. And the other thing I find is so interesting is that OTS, I remember they said, you'll have no bad days. And so when I crossed over, I was like, I'm going to be tough and I'm going to be stern and I'm going to be, and that like lasts for a couple months and you're tired and drained, like you're saying. And then I'm like, okay, now I'm joking and, being the person I am and I always was. And so it's interesting, like you said, the egos and the masks, like you can try to kind of put it on there for a little while. I'm like, I'm uptight. I'm the officer. I'm like, nah, I just got to be who I am.
And that's the rub. Quick plug for General Pye, who I don't ever shy away from, sharing openly how big of a fan I am of her. But have you ever met a general officer that was more authentically themselves? I mean, I don't know if you pop up photos here, but there's thousands of photos with her in a costume. In like SLW in 2019, she wore, I think it was Princess Leia. Maybe I'm conflating too, but like she is just who she is. And I think when you get to that level, kind of what you're saying, Nate, there's a power and a strength. People can feel. Like it's one thing to like say something and it's like, okay, I've got subordinates, they're going to go execute this stuff. Sure. But how does your leadership make people feel? And when you're tapped into who you are and that's actually flowing out of you, there's a strength, there's a tangible strength behind that leadership. And Zach Gooch, a really, really good friend of mine, shared the story on my podcast. It was General Pye's first day at DHHQ. And she started a conversation around a desk, and all of a sudden there was 5 other people, 10 other people, 20. And maybe 45 minutes into it, there was a crowd of like 45, 50 people around her. She didn't call a meeting. She didn't ask anybody to come over. It was just, her laugh was infectious. She was cracking jokes. She was connecting with people. She was learning who people were. She would make these fun little nicknames for people all the time. McRib is one that stands out. She literally called McRib for like a year straight because he loved McRibs. And that was then his name. And so that goes a little bit in the culture conversation. But yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying.
Be yourself. It took me, 30 some odd years, but geez, be yourself. The next pillar you have, Mike, is the broken healthcare system. So can you touch on, again, wave tops? Because geez, we could talk all day, but what are some of the biggest flaws in the current healthcare system?
Yeah, wave tops. Because now we're, identity is one thing. And this is like, all right, now we're in professional territory. So I can go 10 miles deep. All right, wave tops. So the US, Google online, cost versus quality countries, and you will find no shortage of graphs, data, research on cost versus quality. And among the 10 highest GDP countries in the world, so theoretically the most established, the most successful, the US is the lowest in quality and highest in cost. But here's the thing. You'd be like, oh, wow, that's kind of crazy. It's not even close, Nate. Like there's a grouping, and that's the other 9. So it's like the 9 are here, and then the US is like, I don't know if I'm on screen. The US is like down here. You're like, surely that's wrong. There's like 20 other graphs that show that. And so, this is, for me, part of the reason I left the Medical Service Corps is I just saw what was happening on the outside. And, I've got all the license and certifications and master's degrees and all that stuff. And so I kind of have a unique insight into what it specifically means for the system to be broken. That term's kind of thrown out there, right? Like people are like, big pharma. It's like, yes, true. But what does that specifically mean? Like, what is international sourcing? What are referrals for the PBM? Like, how do these processes work? And so my desire, so who I am as an individual, going back to the first conversation, tying it in, great transition, boom. I am somebody that loves to serve. Like, I love when I can help somebody and they are appreciative and feel energized by me just serving them. So combining that with my kind of clear understanding of what needs to occur and what's broken in the US healthcare system, those converge into the role that I'm in now with IOA.
That's a perfect segue. What would an ideal healthcare system look like if you could build it from the ground up?
There's no way that I'm reading the questions and placing transitions for you, Nate. I'm also I understand as well that I'm going a little bit deeper. This is the problem when you give a podcast host a microphone to talk, because we're used to asking questions, and it's like, oh, I can pontificate a little bit here. What would be an ideal healthcare system? Okay, right off the rip, and let me couch this a little bit as it relates to the U.S. healthcare system. I think it's a separate conversation to say, what, like if we restored healthcare in the world, what would that look like? Let me couch it in the U.S. healthcare system as it relates to it being broken. How do we get it to a state that's functional? The number one answer I would say is transparency, without a question. Transparency, and then specifically in the pharmaceutical industry, if we could get to price transparency, I think people sense and feel that what is happening is not good. High level wave tops, right? If there was transparency in why, I think there would be an outcry from employers, from employees, from U.S. citizens. And I think if they saw a peek behind the curtain, there'd be a lot of things occurring up at Congress for sure, very quickly.
So do you think that would be like the price of aspirin is always the price of aspirin and things like that? Or can you expand on what you mean by transparency?
Sure. Yeah. And again, just staying with the pharmacy side, I think, we're lagging behind. I got to be careful here, Nate. So we are lagging behind other countries in terms of regulatory reform and legislature as it relates to price transparency, capping necessary medications. And I'm very familiar with all the conversations because we are by far one of the most innovative countries in terms of pharmaceutical development, R&D, specialized healthcare. Sure, yes, I will concede those facts for sure. But when we talk about laying in the pharmaceuticals programmatically across the United States, I'm going to use a term here. This might get me into some trouble. They are price gouging U.S. citizens. Simple enough. Look at the definition of price gouging, and I'll back that up by saying there is some lawyers right now going after Fortune 10, Fortune 50 companies for that exact thing. Officers in those publicly traded companies have a fiduciary responsibility for their stakeholders and how they lead and govern their employees. Well, when you're charging somebody $1,000 for a $10 medication, there's a problem with that. And you're going to say, oh, that's what the health plan says. Okay, you're the CEO. You are responsible to your stakeholders and charging an additional $990. And now we're talking, lay that out. Let's say you've got 100,000 employees. We're not talking about $990. We're talking about $20 million for like a single drug, obviously speaking of like the Fortune 10 companies. And so that's what the lawyers are going after. But when I say transparency, that's what I mean. I don't think people realize just how big the numbers get. And that's really all I want to do. It's why I do a free analysis for companies. I just want them to see what's happening. And from somebody with a master's degree or several master's degree certifications to go in to look at the nuances, to look at the complicated nature of healthcare and say, hey, you are getting, quote, gouged for $10 million over here. Oh, and here's another $19 million. So on and so forth. That's my goal. That's my mission. It's not about money, but this is the sweet spot, right? You talk about being yourself, and after you became an officer, having fun and kind of cutting it up with your staff. This is me. Like, I want to go into the complicated stuff and serve people. And so, I'm living out my passion. I'm living out who I am. And it's a really exciting season to be in because everything is coming to a point right now in the healthcare system. There's a demand for change. There's a demand for innovation. There's things happening with price transparency, RFK Jr., with Trump pushing certain reforms in the healthcare industry. It is perfect time for the stuff that we're doing with IOA.
That's awesome. So for all the people that are out there, have no experience, aren't healthcare, things like that, maybe this is out of order, but maybe to back up a little bit, could you kind of walk us through incentive structure and how that doesn't really play to like good health outcomes?
Sure. Again, wave top. So we'll stay on the pharmaceutical side because this is the lowest hanging fruit. Like, when you go into a new organization and obviously you want to do a good job, and so your commander's like, all right, tell me what you think, and you go in, you're like, this person is like taking a medical record, they're scanning it, they're faxing it to themselves, then they're loading it back in for a digital record. You're like, oh my gosh, awesome. Right off the rip, I could save like 2 FTEs because I just need to scan it and go, like that kind of stuff. It's just like, it's so obvious. That is the pharmaceutical industry right now in America. It's like the lowest hanging fruit, but the amounts associated with it are astronomically big. So the reason for this, for the pharmaceutical side, again, that's where we'll stay. Okay, so 2 points. So international outsourcing for pharmaceuticals is how we can save money pretty easily. There's an inflated cost with manufacturing, with development, all sorts of stuff that, again, I'll stay high level, that would keep that in the United States. It's why everybody uses the U.S. inside the U.S. for their pharmaceuticals. Well, there's precedent now in certain states. Colorado's one of them. Florida, there's several others that allow legally to outsource through Canada, where medications are a tenth the cost in the U.S. And so there's absolutely regulated, professional, very clear lines of effort to just simply outsource through Canada for pharmaceuticals. The second, and talking specifically about the incentive structure, is PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, get rebates for certain drugs. And so they have a tiered list, and I won't go too deep into that, but they have a tiered list of what is an approved medication. And that is directly tied to how much money the PBM gets back. I'm going to pause there. Did you hear what I just said, Nate?
Yeah.
How wild is that?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's so obvious. When you peel back the curtain, you're like, what? That's illegal. No, it's not.
All these things, we always talk about checks and balances and government, or even like the government purchase card. Someone's got to check it and make sure. Just kind of wild to think, like you said, you say it out loud, like no one really checks out. Like they just get money for choosing certain things that maybe not be the best for the patient.
But we're talking about trillions of dollars. This isn't like a couple $1 million that we could save in the Air Force. We're talking about trillions of dollars. And so that's why I use the word transparency. I want people to see what those things are. I want them to see why the cost of medications are so high. And it's not the only way. There are regulated alternatives that are both legal and professionally managed that can cut costs by 50% or more for a lot of these employers.
So that's, perfect segue again into the next question. So you're someone, you work at the company, you're not the boss, you're just part of a plan. What can individuals do to take charge of their own health?
Yeah. Well, let me back up here. Take charge of their health or take charge of their health plan. 2 separate conversations.
Maybe both. I mean, if you have a better plan, you have better health, right?
All right. I will stay really high level here, Nate. I promise you. Okay. Okay, health plan, just reach out to me. I'm happy to do a free assessment I'm not looking for money. I'm not looking to get paid. I'm not looking for your business necessarily. If it goes well, great. But genuinely, like I said, I want to help people see the nuances of their health plans and save the money. Individual health, I would say consistency is the enemy of mediocrity. And if my wife listens to this episode, she's going to smile because she hears me say that all the time. Consistency is the killer. Above any extreme diet program, any workout program, if you're consistent, you will win. And so what are those things that you can commit to consistently? Sometimes it's just getting out and doing a 1 mile walk or jog every single day. Pick those things that you can be consistent with. Drinking water, getting sleep. There's so many things that are universally accepted, but not many people actually implement them. Well, take those things. I just listed a few. Drink water, get better sleep, get moving. Do it with consistency. Build a habit, build a routine, and then add to it. So my personal transformation, so two and a half years ago, I was 285 pounds. And I went on a personal journey spiritually, mentally, physically, where I found myself one day I was 220 pounds and ripped, like gained a ton of muscle, was just shredded. And that was less to do with me trying to get shredded and more to do with I had an intentionality, I had a plan that I committed to. And one of those things was working out. And so I listened to Audible. I would listen to a book every single morning while I worked out. And a good friend of mine, Ben Garland, recommended to me Miracle Morning. And so I used that as the structure for about a year and then kind of adapted it to be my own over time. But that's what I would recommend, consistency.
So I'd like to try to get you to expand a little bit more on the health plans. I love the connection to you and getting that help and things like that. But are there documents that someone can download? Are there huge red flags? Are there things someone could go and like log into their account? Or, I mean, I guess it's based probably maybe too broad for everybody because their plans are so different. But are there things that like, universally where you could check on a few things and see if it's completely out of whack?
So we're getting in the territory of like claims data and understanding like international outsourcing. I would say this, here's an answer. If you're able to discern whether or not your pharmaceuticals are coming from the US or outside the US, that's a great starting point. If they're coming from the US, I can guarantee you, I'd put money on it. I bet anybody out there that's listening that you are overpaying significantly for your pharmacy benefit. I think once you get in, and let's just say this, I'm just going to say this out loud. The healthcare industry is, I think, intentionally messy and complex because that creates a barrier to entry for HR directors, CFOs, people that don't have an MHA or a fellow of the American College of Healthcare Executives or a licensed health benefits broker. Like, you need all of these things to just simply understand how to look at the nuances of the plan. And so I would say start there. Start with the international outsourcing if you can discern that. And certainly there's other stuff. I don't want to go outside of the pharmacy because then it gets incredibly complex. So just for reference, when I would go in and I would take on a healthcare plan for an employer, which is what I do as a senior vice president of strategic partnerships with IOA, I kind of stand in the gap of a Cigna, Blue Cross Blue Shield. There's about 30 to 40, maybe more, maybe less, is that I'm going to look at stop loss, dental, vision, all these different things that have their own categories. And within those categories, there's deep nuances to how to implement those programs. And so it's so complex that it keeps the everyday people out. It keeps the HR director out. It keeps the CFO out. So could they go in and save money? Sure. But it's extremely complicated. And it's exactly why they require licenses and master's degrees and certifications. Because if you go in and you muck something up, people's lives are at risk. And oh, by the way, there's like stacks of law, there's stacks of state law, all sorts of stuff that would keep the everyday person from looking at their health plan, which I think is by design.
Dang, that's definitely eye-opening. It seems like it's there for a reason. Your last pillar is giving to the nations in the deepest area of poverty. So what first inspired you to serve communities in extreme poverty?
Yeah. So this is like a super personal question to me because I'm ashamed to say that I think distraction is something that keeps us from considering the rest of the world. There's nobody in America that's not wealthy. There's an extreme statement. By worldly standards, when we're talking about the 1040 window, which is that area over in Asia, and I'll leave people to Google that on their own time, but we're talking about 80+% of the world's poverty. So, we can go get clean water and have a drink. That is not the case in the 1040 window. There's food available at pretty much every single corner. Also not available. There's these things that we take for granted. And I think, that's another opportunity for us to be grateful in America. But it's also a calling for us to say, okay, so there's a book called The Trellis and the Vine. Great book. But it also talks about poverty. And so by American standards, we often consider poverty as a direct association with material poverty. Great. Sure. There's people that have less money, have less means. Absolutely. But there's also spiritual poverty. And so the great irony of life is you could go over to some of these very remote cities in the 1040 window, these remote towns or tribes or villages. Spiritual wealth is through the roof. And when I say spiritual, you could take that a myriad of ways. I'm not necessarily just saying, spiritual in terms of my faith in Christ, but spiritual just in terms of gratitude, abundance,
content.
What's contentment? Great. These are good words. So there's a transfer of, quote, wealth that I think we're being called into as Americans because there's so many Americans that are just in deep spiritual poverty. Deep spiritual poverty. And the great irony of life is often those with the highest material wealth have the greatest spiritual poverty. And so I think the beauty of this is we can transfer material wealth to those that have spiritual wealth. And the beauty of it is that in return, we get spiritual wealth, even though we may be losing some of our material wealth, if that makes sense. So I was introduced to this by one of my best friends, KJ Rendawa, who was a classmate of mine. He simultaneously got out at 14 and a half years from the Air Force, also on a great career trajectory, was doing extremely well, probably one of the greatest leaders I've ever met in my life. So he moved out here to Colorado Springs. He's actually 3 minutes up the road from this new house, which is crazy. But he joined AIMS.org as the International Mobilization Director. And I love this man and I love his heart. And so I was introduced by him to the great, great need. And really, as a medical service corps officer, I love the structure. They basically have a CRM that organizes all the business requirements. And so they have these local native businesses that sustain villages, tribes, local areas, and basically infuses commerce through microloans. It's a really, really intriguing and well-organized model. You could go into any, Fortune 500 company, and it'll rival that shoulder to shoulder, which I've never seen in a nonprofit ministry organization. And so I love their efficiency. I love the way they do what they do. And certainly the need itself is tremendous.
That's awesome. That is some really good stuff. I'm curious. I love stories. So I'm hoping, can you share a story where you've seen the impact from giving time, talent, and treasure rather than just money?
I think rather than a specific incident, because I want to be careful with anonymity and respecting, names and people, but certainly the greatest joy in my life is mentoring people, pouring into them. And I'll say this, if you don't have a mechanism for giving back, I'm not even going to say like shame on you or anything like that. What I'm going to say is you're missing out, because we were created to give. Like I guarantee you, at the very core of who you are as a human being, there's something inside of you that wants to give your time, treasure, and talent. And so for me, it's life-giving to spend the time, the intentionality, and there's nothing that can replace this eye contact. I mean, it's even better face-to-face, right? Because you can feel and feed off each other. Nate, you and I have great chemistry, but it's even better, in person. You get something from that transaction at one of the deepest levels that you can understand. And then obviously, the people that you're giving that to, there's at a minimum appreciation, but you have an opportunity to share experiences, to give sacrificially to these people that are in great need. And we've already broken out two of those distinctions. There's spiritual and material, but there's so many other things. And the transaction is there. It's not just one way. And I think a lot of people want to think, oh, I'm giving, it's one way, I get nothing. Nope. Ask anybody that is wealthy that gives away millions of dollars. Ask them how they feel about giving. I guarantee you most of them will say it's the most significant thing they do, because we're hardwired to think and feel that way.
That's the way that we were designed. Well, Mike, the final takeaway, if someone is feeling lost in purpose or overwhelmed by today's problems, what's one piece of advice you'd give them?
Yeah, I'm going to stay on theme here, just to be concise and simple. I'm going to say, take the time. Take the time. And you're going to say, I don't have the time. And I'm going to challenge you on that. I think so many Americans are inundated with things and they're feeding their body like crap. They're not reading books to grow. And the sad reality of that, a lot of them are drinking alcohol. They're robbing themselves of good sleep and restoration. They're not doing the things with intentionality and time to get to a good space. And so they wake up in the morning, 7:30, roll out of bed, head straight to work. They're depressed. They're pessimistic. You will get more energy. You will have more time when you start to do those things that you know are good. And that was the origins of the It Is Good podcast. Quick plug, It Is Good podcast. Sorry, Nate. But that's the genesis of laying in those things that you trust and have faith the outcome will be good. And I think the lie that a lot of people believe is, I don't have the time. Change some stuff and see how much time you have. I get 7 hours of sleep a night, and it's great rest. I feel really energized. I have a ton of energy. My mental clarity is through the roof, but I also don't eat junk food regularly. I don't drink. I take care of myself. I'm intentional. I allocate time to the things that are important. And I think I would say that same thing to the listeners. Spend the time and be intentional.
There is time if you make it. Well, thank you, Mike, for coming out. Wanted to ask you, where can people connect with you and learn a little bit more about you? I guess you just mentioned it, but
my tag is at tall Mike McClain. I'm 6'8", by the way, for those that don't know. At tall Mike McClain. I've got a podcast. It is a good podcast. Connect with me on LinkedIn. That's a great way to start. That's probably my primary social media on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to keep the conversation going. Find us on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, or Buzzsprout and share your thoughts. Please, if you can, drop a review. I love you all. See ya.